The truth of my experience. I've lived with my father for the past 2.5 years, for the first time in 13 years, although my boyfriend of 4 years and I were both working at the time. Only months into living with my father, my PTSD, anxiety and depression hit me full swing. I chose to see my doctor who prescribed me with alprazolam, Xanax, the same day and put me on a treatment plan. I fell into the trap of dependency and numbness within a few months, and I started noticing my anxiety attacks got worse than ever. I found myself having to take my Xanax while I'm at work in order to function without feeling like I'd have an inevitable breakdown. I was a full-time assistant manager at Claire's at the time. I started seeing that the meds were beginning to cause problems in my relationships with my father and my boyfriend, as if I just stopped caring. I turned into an emotionless zombie, a mean one too. That was enough for me to stop taking the drug. I didn't understand at the time the effects it would cause me long-term. I thought I had a hormone imbalance afterwards because I was always super timid, yet hostile, as if I could just snap at anyone, at any moment. I thought it was my job environment, so I looked for a new job. I became full-time assistant manager at Rockport, a slower-paced company, and located in a more sophisticated area. I did the best I could every day, and for some reason they just always expected more. It was emotionally draining in a different way. You'll begin to notice the pattern. I was working even later. I had more responsibility, and I was even more miserable. At home my father would have my boyfriend do him favors like he's a chauffeur, for free. My boyfriend cooked, cleaned while I worked, took care of our cats, and even worked multiple jobs throughout the year so that we could save up and leave. Somehow, my dad saw us moving up as a threat to him, and began putting us in awkward situations pretty much to test us. He'd never ask for us to give him money for rent. If he had, that would have been no issue. The thing is, my dad is a covert narcissist and very passive-aggressive. He knew I had bills to pay such as my car, and insurance, food expenses, laundry, clothing and the little things in between, and he'd always throw in my face that I owe him, to him. That means that I have to do anything he wants or I will be guilt-tripped, shamed and gaslighted. If I didn't wash the dirty dishes that he left in the sink the night before which had crusty chunks of food on them before he got out of work, he'd make sure I know how much of an awful daughter I am, how he worked such a long day, and just wanted one thing, to come home and just relax. Relax to him means to lay on the couch for 6 hours watching pointless shows, shameless mostly, lottery, then taking Advil PM to sleep like a baby. Every time I tried to defend myself or let him know what he does is like a slap in the face, he'd brush me off and say, "Oh, you know, I'm just playing around. I love you, princess." Sometimes, he'd even apologize, yet he'd continue saying and doing the same things I've just tried to let him know bothered me. It's like he did it just to keep seeing how upset I could get. Every day it was always something I had to do, something I had to deal with, solve, or handle for my dad. As soon as 10 o'clock hit when I'd already be on my way home from work, I'd receive a call, almost faithfully. He'd ask me to stop at the 7/11 and pick him up an Advil PM or lottery ticket. Usually it was no big deal, but being that my boyfriend was the one picking me up, doing all the driving, sometimes it was just inconvenient and out of the way. For some reason, if I didn't get to fulfill his wish or if I forgot, I'd always end up feeling emotionally wiped out. He made sure I felt the way he did. My dad loves to make it known how hard he works. He's a mechanic, and that all he asked was just for one small thing, anything to make me feel small, in a passive-aggressive manner. If I do not get on my hands and knees to wipe off the spilled ice cream or juice that dried up on the floor, caused by my father, it will stay there for days, accumulate my poor cat's hair and dirt. And then my dad will come home from work one day and complain that I never clean up the house. "Can you just sweep for once? I work so hard and just want to come home to relax," rarely ever acknowledging when it is maintained. And if he does acknowledge it, he finds something else to nag me about. When I need to do my laundry, he'd say, "Ugh, I need to do my laundry too." "You think you can do mine too?" Every single time. My boyfriend and I have yet to be able to wash a whole load. Laundromat, only so many bags can fit in my car. I'm only a good daughter if I can do that for him. He may not directly say that, but that's what his energy says to me. I didn't know at the time that I was actually dealing with this kind of person. I've been 6 hours away from my dad for 14 years and he never came to see me, despite the promise of doing so. I loved my dad. He was the reason I am an empath. I saw the world take advantage of him when I was a child and during the times I did get to see him. He was funny and had a huge heart in my eyes. Everyone in the city knew him, It at least gave me comfort that he had friends to watch over him. I used to worry. He used to send me money when I lived with my mom and stepdad. I hated everything about living there, and when my dad sent me money, I got to buy chocolate and sweet stuff, which made my prison not so bad all the time. My dad must have thought I'd never grow up. He thought all it would take to have a relationship with his children was giving them money and food every week. That was amazing, don't get me wrong, but he made sure I always knew and wanted that gratification, and I always gave it to him. He knew I hated living with my mom. My stepdad was my childhood nightmare. He knew this. When I'd come to visit for the summer, he knew exactly what I liked. He always remembered how lit up my face used to be when he bought me chocolate and let me eat cereal in the evening, or just playing with me outside. He used to do that a lot when I was little. I was so easy to love and please as a child because when I was with him, it was the opposite of living with my mom and stepdad. I felt like an orphan with them, but with my dad, I felt like a princess. I was his youngest child. I made up excuses all my life for my dad's behavior, lies, and manipulation. I felt he was oblivious to how absent-minded he was, but in reality he just acted that way towards me. My boyfriend and I had a hard time in our relationship for some time because I couldn't accept that he would deliberately act like this and disregard me so much, on purpose. I'd even subconsciously take out my anger and frustration out on him because I couldn't express myself to my father. I felt like just trying to be heard was like pulling teeth with an ex-boyfriend for him to love me. I just needed my father to be there for me, as a father, not a friend. If I had a hard day, he'd egg me on, then try to suck up with the usual apology and I love you and then start making up all these awesome plans that he swears he's gonna make, and take me, or that we do something new and fun together. Knowing that he wouldn't do it unless I reminded him and begged him to do it. And if it did happen, he'd always say, "Good thing I came up with this idea. Are you happy?" I knew his "are you happy" questions made him feel good when I said yes, and especially when I actually meant it. But it made me sad that I'd shatter his ego and pride if I said I wasn't happy or didn't have a smile on his face. He always just wanted to make me smile, it seemed. I love him so much. Just writing about all this makes me so sad, but that's where my weakness always got me taken advantage of. I don't want to paint a negative picture of my father. I am only stating the reality of the situation. I understand how it was for me when I felt like I was losing grip of control in my life, but then I started to work on myself and realized I didn't need to have control over everything, over another person, especially. So I no longer excuse his behaviors, but I also understand on a much deeper level why he does the things he does, and why he's the way he is. It took me a lot of psychology books, videos, podcasts, and self-reflection, but I now understand, and I can forgive. This past year, since I've made the decision to quit my job and focus on my personal development and spiritual growth, I've been given the gift of seeing the true reality of the dynamic I was so blinded by, yet had control over me for my whole life. My dad thinks money is what makes me happy. And I've realized that that's what his mindset of women has always been. Women are just an object to men, and as long as you give them money, they should do what you expect of the men, just be happy. That was exactly what was shown to him growing up. So that was the reality he tried to enforce on me because it was all he knew. If I had a breakdown around him, he'd mirror me. I felt bad for feeling things around him. He never knew how to handle it. He'd freak out and say he's going to take me to the hospital or call an ambulance because I'm acting crazy. When I finally started gaining the guts to try and tell him how I feel, that he never listened to me and uses me as his punching bag made, he'd throw everything in my face that he does, monetarily, and say he works so damn hard and doesn't have time to deal with what I have to say. His excuse for anything I have to say is, "I just had a horrible day at work, can we talk about this another time?" He truly believes that I am just trying to hurt him, it seems. Because he never truly listens, no matter what different ways I've tried to express my feelings to him. This time I couldn't take his deflecting tactics. He tried very hard to distract me from what I was meaning to say, and he looked for anything to say that could point the blame on me. So basically he has a reason and justification for everything that I have tried to talk to him about or just asking him to clean up his mess. He makes up a reason as to why he just didn't clean up after himself, every time. Like I said, I felt like he was starting to do these crazy things on purpose. I knew I wasn't going crazy. I started keeping track of things, observing more and especially going off his energy. I was always right. My dad tried and tried for weeks, before he finally pushed my last button. I didn't expect things to unfold the way it did, but it was actually perfect and I feel no shame about it. I wouldn't normally just confront my dad about something like this, especially since I've been working on my anxiety and stress levels, but if you knew how much of a slap in the face it was to never receive respect from your father, I'm sure you can understand why I was so upset. I was getting ready to wash my few dishes before relaxing and doing my art projects, and the first thing I see is soggy chunks of food on the dish sponge. Now let me just give you a few key pieces of information so you don't think I'm crazy. 1. I had just recently asked my dad if he could get new dish sponges because the other ones get so disgustingly and insanitarily dirty, and if he could please stop leaving dirt and chunks of food on the sponge that we use to wash the dishes. He agreed. 2. He even proceeded to buy styrofoam plates, cups and utensils that same day, to avoid having to use the sponge. 3. I had just washed my pots and tea mugs before he got home from work, so I know for a fact that the sponge was clean. These were my confirmations that he was actually trying to mess with my head. I was pretty upset, and I knocked on his door to show him the sponge and tell him to please stop doing this, and that I felt he was doing these things on purpose. His excuses were I didn't even use the sponge, maybe it fell into the sink, that's why I bought styrofoam plates. I also learned not to go back and forth with him, but this time I just wasn't having it. I was tired of him disrespecting me and lying straight to my face. He laughed in my face and said yes, so I just purposely put food on the sponge in a sarcastic tone, like I'm crazy. But yes, that's exactly what he did. I let out my feelings, and he didn't want to hear it, so he yelled, when you guys start paying rent then you can do whatever the F you want, and left. When he came back, he said don't worry about me, I'm gonna move in Harry's house, my brother. I already talked to him, and you have a month from now to start paying the rent. I used to fear that moment, and that's why I let the manipulation and games go on for so long. I was also in denial and kept making excuses for him because I could not accept the reality that my father would want me to feel this way. I felt numb. I think it's because I knew deep down that he'd act this way all along. I had to force myself to cry it out. I have a tendency to automatically disconnect from reality when experiencing trauma, which I don't know how to process, and I didn't want to hold this one in. I knew I was hurt. I realized I need to just get out of his hair. He was bluffing all along, and I had a feeling he would be bluffing. Overall, it's just an emotional roller coaster that I'm ready to exit. I have learned a lot about myself in this journey, and it has taught me tremendous resilience. For that I am grateful. I've learned to love myself no matter what my parents try to project onto me. It has nothing to do with me. I pray that they find their inner guidance every single day, and learn to love themselves. I am no longer basing my self-worth off of how my parents portray and treat me. I know my worth, and that's what's important. This is just a snippet of my story. I hope anyone who can relate may build the strength and courage to stand up for themselves and for what they know is right. You all deserve the best.